The scorching heat of the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1878 was unlike anything Sophia Harrington had ever experienced in her 22 years of life in Boston. The stagecoach journey from Tucson to St. Joe had been an unrelenting trial by fire, dust coating her throat and sweat soaking through the layers of her traveling dress, despite the parasol she clutched with white-knuckled determination. As the stagecoach rounded the final bend toward the small mining town nestled in the foothills, black spots began to dance at the edges of her vision, the world tilting dangerously as she fought to remain conscious. "Almost there, madam," the driver called from above, his voice seemingly distant though he sat just feet away. "St. Joe comin' up. Your future husband should be waitin' for us at the general store." Future husband. The words echoed hollowly in Sophia's mind as she tried to focus on the approaching buildings that wavered mirage-like in the distance. Edward Blackwood, the man who had placed the advertisement seeking a bride, the man whose letters had promised comfort and security, the man she had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry despite having never laid eyes on him. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before what appeared to be the town's main street, a dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings bleached nearly white by the relentless sun. Sophia gathered her reticule with trembling hands, attempting to stand as the driver opened the door. "Miss Harrington." A gruff voice called. "Miss Harrington, I'm Edward Blackwood." She managed to glimpse a tall, gaunt man with cold eyes before the heat and exhaustion finally overwhelmed her. As Sophia stepped from the stagecoach, the world tilted violently, her knees buckled, and she pitched forward into unconsciousness, aware in her final moments of clarity that she was falling directly toward the dusty street. Instead of the hard ground, strong arms caught her. Through the haze of her fading consciousness, she heard a different voice, deep and steady. Miss, can you hear me?" And then there was nothing but darkness. When Sophia next opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a simple bed in an unfamiliar room. A damp cloth rested on her forehead, and the stifling heat had been replaced by the relative coolness of shade. She blinked, trying to orient herself, her mouth parched and head pounding. "You're awake," came that same deep voice she'd heard before losing consciousness. Sophia turned her head to see a man rising from a chair near the bed. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and a short beard framed a face that might have been sculpted from the surrounding mountains, all planes and angles, yet somehow gentle. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, regarded her with genuine concern. "Where am I?" She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My home," he answered, moving to pour water from a pitcher into a cup. "Just outside St. Joe. You fainted from the heat when you stepped off the stagecoach." He approached, offering the cup. "Here, drink this slowly." As he helped her sit up enough to sip the water, Sophia became aware of her state. Someone had removed her traveling jacket and boots, but she remained otherwise clothed, her stays still uncomfortably tight. "Edward," she murmured, suddenly remembering. "Mr. Blackwood, he was there to meet me." Something dark passed over the man's features. "I'm not Blackwood," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "Name's Rowan Nash. I own the cattle ranch that borders the northeast edge of town." He paused, helping her take another sip. "Rest now, you're safe here." "But Mr. Blackwood will have to wait," Rowan said firmly. "You're in no condition to be moved again today. The doctor's been by already. Said you're suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. Prescribed rest and plenty of water." His expression softened slightly. "Don't worry about Blackwood. Word's been sent to him about what happened." Sophia sank back against the pillow, too weak to argue. Thank you, Mr. Nash. Just Rowan, he corrected, returning to his chair. And you're Miss Harrington, according to your trunk. The stagecoach driver had it sent over. Sophia, she offered. Sophia Harrington. A slight smile touched his lips, transforming his rugged features. Rest, Miss Sophia. We can talk more when you're feeling stronger. Despite her confusion and the strangeness of her situation, exhaustion pulled at her. Before she could formulate another thought, sleep claimed her once more. When Sophia next awoke, sunlight was streaming through a window, casting golden rectangles on the wooden floor. She felt markedly better, though still weak. Sitting up carefully, she discovered a simple cotton nightgown had replaced her traveling clothes, and her hair had been loosened from its pins. A flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks at the thought of a stranger attending to her so intimately. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman entered carrying a tray. She was plump and pleasant-looking, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to diminish the kindness in her eyes. "Oh, you're awake." "That's good to see," the woman said, placing the tray on a small table near the bed. "I'm Martha Peterson. I help Mr. Nash with the house and cooking. How are you feeling, dear?" "Much better, thank you," Sophia replied, automatically reaching to check her hair and then smoothing the unfamiliar nightgown. "Did you?" Martha nodded. "I changed you out of those travel clothes. You were burning up with fever yesterday." "Don't you worry. I've raised 5 children, nothing I haven't seen before." She poured a cup of tea from a pot on the tray. "Rowan, Mr. Nash fetched me from town after he brought you here. Man may know everything about cattle and horses, but a sick young woman, that was beyond his expertise." She chuckled. "I'm grateful for the care," Sophia said, accepting the tea, "but I really must get to town. Mr. Blackwood will be concerned." Martha's expression shifted subtly. "Drink your tea and have some breakfast first. Dr. Simmons said you're not to exert yourself today." She indicated the tray, which held a bowl of porridge, sliced apples, and bread with butter and honey. "Eat. Regain your strength." After Martha left, Sophia ate slowly, surprised by her appetite. The food was simple but delicious, especially after days of irregular meals on the journey west. As she ate, she took stock of her surroundings. The room was plain but comfortable, a single bed with clean linens, a washstand with basin and pitcher, a small dresser, and the chair where Rowan had sat. A braided rug covered part of the wooden floor, and curtains made from flower sacking hung at the window. Through it, she could see blue sky and the distant outline of mountains. She was finishing her tea when the door opened again, this time revealing Rowan Nash. He'd clearly been working outside. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscled forearms, and a light sheen of sweat glistened on his brow. "Miss Harrington," he said, remaining in the doorway. "Martha says you're feeling better." "Yes, thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Nash." Sophia set down her cup. "But I really must get to town. Mr. Blackwood isn't expecting you until tomorrow," Rowan interrupted, his expression unreadable. "I sent word with my ranch hand yesterday. Said you'd suffered from the heat and would need a day to recover." Sophia frowned. "That wasn't necessary. I'm much improved and I don't wish to impose. It's no imposition," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "And the doctor was clear you need rest today. If you push yourself too soon, you could end up worse than before." Sophia wanted to protest, but the lingering weakness in her limbs suggested he was right. "Very well," she conceded, "but tomorrow I must go to town." A shadow seemed to pass over his face. "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "I should tell you I brought your trunk inside." Martha put some of your things in the dresser. Your traveling outfit was quite soiled from the journey. Martha has washed it." Sophia felt heat creep into her cheeks again. "Thank you, and please thank Martha as well," he nodded, turning to go. Mr. Nash, she called, stopping him. May I ask, how is it that you were there when I arrived, at the stagecoach? Rowan turned back, one hand still on the door frame. I was at the general store picking up supplies. Right place, right time, I suppose. His eyes met hers directly. Get some rest, Miss Harrington. We can talk more later if you'd like. With that, he was gone, leaving Sophia with far more questions than answers. The day passed slowly as Sophia alternated between sleeping and sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a quilt despite the summer heat. From her vantage point, she could see parts of Rowan Nash's ranch, a large barn, corrals where horses milled about, and beyond them, rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. Martha brought her lunch and dinner, chatting amiably about the ranch and St. Joe. Sophia learned that Rowan had established his ranch, the North Star, 7 years earlier after coming west from Missouri. He employed 4 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse behind the main house and was known throughout the territory for his prize cattle and fair dealings. What about Mr. Blackwood? Sophia asked as Martha cleared away her dinner dishes. What can you tell me about him? Martha's hand stilled momentarily. Edward Blackwood owns the largest mine in these parts, she said carefully. The Silver Queen made him quite wealthy. And is he well regarded in the community? Martha seemed to choose her words with deliberation. He's an important man in St. Joe, employs half the town one way or another. Sophia noted what Martha didn't say. I see. Martha patted her hand. Get some sleep, dear. Tomorrow we'll be here soon enough. That night, Sophia lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the occasional whinny of a horse, and the ceaseless chirping of crickets. She thought of the letters from Edward Blackwood that had prompted her journey formal, proper letters describing his position in St. Joe and his desire for a well-educated, respectable wife to share his home. There had been no warmth in those letters, no passion, but they had offered escape from a life of drudgery as a companion to her ailing aunt, the only family she had left after her parents' deaths. When Sophia finally slept, she dreamed not of Edward Blackwood's promised security, but of startling blue eyes and a deep voice saying, "You're safe here." Morning arrived with the sounds of the ranch coming to life, men's voices calling to one another, horses nickering, and the clatter of activity from what Sophia presumed was the kitchen. She rose and found that Martha had indeed unpacked some of her clothes. Selecting a simple blue dress, she dressed carefully, grateful that her strength seemed mostly returned. As she pinned up her hair, Sophia examined herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her appeared somehow different from the one who had boarded the stagecoach in Tucson. Her face was slightly sunburned across the nose and cheeks, and her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. A knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, dear. You're up and dressed, that's wonderful. How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thank you," Sophia replied, and it was true. The weakness and disorientation of the previous day had largely subsided, though she still felt the lingering effects of her ordeal. "Mr. Nash asked if you'd join him for breakfast on the porch," Martha said, setting down the tray. "Says it's cooler there in the mornings. But only if you're feeling up to it." Curiosity about her rescuer outweighed Sophia's lingering caution. "I'd like that." Martha led her through the house, a modest but well-built structure with a central living area, dining room, kitchen, and what appeared to be 3 bedrooms. The furnishings were simple but of good quality, and everything was scrupulously clean. Windows stood open to catch any breeze, and Sophia noted touches that spoke of care: handmade quilts draped over chairs, shelves lined with books, a vase of wildflowers on the dining table. The front porch ran the width of the house, shaded by a sloping roof. Rowan Nash stood when they emerged, setting aside a cup of coffee. In the morning light, Sophia could see him more clearly, tall and powerfully built, with the lean strength of a man who worked the land. He wore simple clothes, a clean shirt open at the collar, trousers tucked into well-worn boots, but carried himself with an easy confidence. "Miss Harrington," he said, his voice as deep and steady as she remembered. "It's good to see you on your feet. Thanks to your hospitality, Mr. Nash." Sophia took the chair he indicated, noting the simple table set with plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "I'm most grateful. Rowan, please." He resumed his seat across from her, and it was nothing more than anyone would do. "I'm not certain that's true," Sophia replied, allowing Martha to pour her coffee. "But I appreciate it nonetheless." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the morning air still relatively cool before the heat of the day set in. Sophia found herself stealing glances at her host, noting the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, and how his hands, though clearly those of a working man, moved with a kind of deliberate grace. "I understand from Martha that you've built quite a successful ranch," she ventured at last. A small smile touched his lips. "The North Star is doing well enough. Started with 50 acres and 30 head of cattle. Now I've got close to 1,000 acres and 300 head." There was quiet pride in his voice, not boasting. "That's impressive." He shrugged. "Just a matter of hard work and some good luck with the weather." He hesitated, then asked, "And you, Miss Harrington, what brings a Boston lady all the way to the Arizona Territory?" Sophia took a sip of coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "I answered an advertisement," she said finally, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Blackwood was seeking a wife, and I was seeking a change." The simplicity of the statement belied the complexity of her decision, but she saw no need to elaborate on her circumstances. "A mail-order bride," Rowan said, his expression neutral. "Yes, it's a practical arrangement that suits both parties." Sophia heard the defensiveness in her voice and tried to temper it. "Mr. Blackwood requires a wife to manage his household, and I require a fresh start." Rowan studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "And you've corresponded with Blackwood. You know what to expect." "We've exchanged several letters over the past few months," Sophia confirmed. "He described his position in St. Joe and the kind of life I might expect as his wife." "I see." Something in Rowan's tone suggested he wanted to say more, but he merely refilled her coffee cup instead. "Mr. Nash Rowan," Sophia said, gathering her courage. "I appreciate your concern, but I really must get to town today. Mr. Blackwood will be expecting me, and I don't wish to cause any misunderstandings." Rowan set down his cup with deliberate care. "Of course. I'll drive you in after breakfast if you're feeling strong enough." "That would be most kind." They finished their meal, and Sophia returned to her room to collect her things. Martha had indeed washed and pressed her traveling outfit, which now hung in the small wardrobe alongside the few dresses she'd brought west. Her trunk stood in a corner, its contents mostly untouched. As she donned her hat and gloves, Sophia felt an unexpected reluctance to leave the ranch. In just a day, she'd come to appreciate the simple cleanliness of the room, the kindness of Martha, and the quiet strength of Rowan Nash. But such thoughts were foolish. Her future lay in St. Joe with Edward Blackwood, the man she had agreed to marry. When she emerged with her reticule, Rowan was waiting by a buckboard wagon, her trunk already loaded. He offered his hand to help her up to the seat, and the momentary contact, his calloused palm warm against her gloved fingers, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. The journey to town took less than 30 minutes, the wagon jolting over the rutted dirt road as Rowan handled the reins with casual expertise. As they approached St. Joe, Sophia got her first clear look at the town she would now call home. It was larger than she had expected, with perhaps 50 buildings arranged along a main street and several side streets. Most were wooden structures, though a few boasted brick facades. The bank, what appeared to be a hotel, and a large building at the end of the street that Rowan identified as the Silver Queen Mining Company offices. "That's Blackwood's operation," he said, nodding toward it. "Controls most of the silver mining in these parts." "And his home?" Sophia asked, scanning the town. "Up there." Rowan pointed to a large white house perched on a hill overlooking the town. Even from a distance, Sophia could see it was the grandest residence in the area, with a wide veranda and multiple chimneys. "Blackwood House, they call it." Something in his tone made Sophia glance at him, but his expression revealed nothing as he guided the wagon down the main street, which was busy with morning activity. People nodded or waved to Rowan, many calling greetings that he returned with a raised hand or brief word. "Where should I take you?" he asked as they passed the general store. "Blackwood's office or his house?" Before Sophia could answer, a tall, thin man stepped into the street, raising a hand to stop the wagon. It was the same gaunt figure she had glimpsed before fainting Edward Blackwood, she presumed. Up close, he appeared to be in his early 40s, with thinning brown hair and a meticulously trimmed mustache. His suit was of fine quality, a stark contrast to the more practical clothing worn by most men on the street. "Nash," he said by way of greeting, his cold eyes moving from Rowan to Sophia. "I see you've brought Miss Harrington into town." Rowan nodded, his posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Blackwood." "Miss Harrington." Blackwood turned to her with what might have been intended as a smile but didn't quite reach his eyes. "I trust you've recovered from your episode." "Yes, thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Sophia replied, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and travel-worn appearance. "Mr. Nash and his housekeeper were most kind." "Yes, well, Nash has always had a reputation for picking up strays." There was a subtle barb in the words that made Sophia's back stiffen. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." Rowan's knuckles whitened on the reins, but his voice remained even. "Where would you like Miss Harrington's trunk delivered?" Blackwood waved a dismissive hand. "Have one of your men take it up to my house. Miss Harrington and I have matters to discuss. She'll be staying at the hotel tonight." Sophia frowned. "The hotel, of course," Blackwood said, his tone suggesting this should be obvious. "It wouldn't be proper for an unmarried lady to stay at my home. We'll be wed tomorrow by Judge Wilson, and then you can take up residence at Blackwood House." He offered his arm. "Shall we? I've reserved a private dining room at the hotel for luncheon." Sophia hesitated, glancing at Rowan, who was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. "Thank you again, Mr. Nash," she said softly, "for everything." His eyes met hers briefly. "You're welcome, Miss Harrington." There was something in his gaze, a warning, a regret. She couldn't be sure. "Good day to you both." With that, he flicked the reins and the wagon moved on, leaving Sophia standing beside Edward Blackwood in the dusty street, feeling strangely bereft. The Grand Hotel of St. Joe hardly deserved its name, a 3-story wooden building with pretensions of grandeur in the form of crimson curtains and gilt-framed mirrors in the lobby. But to Sophia, accustomed to the simplicity of the ranch house over the past day, it seemed imposing enough. Blackwood led her to a small private dining room off the main restaurant, where a white-clothed table was set for two. A waiter appeared immediately to pull out Sophia's chair and pour water into crystal glasses, a luxury that seemed out of place in the frontier town. "You must have questions," Blackwood said once they were seated and had placed their orders. "About St. Joe, about my business, about our future together." "Yes," Sophia admitted, studying the man who would be her husband by this time tomorrow. Up close, Edward Blackwood was not unattractive. His features were regular, his clothing impeccable, and he carried himself with the assurance of a man accustomed to authority. Yet there was something in his pale eyes that unsettled her, a calculation that seemed to assess her value rather than her person. "The Silver Queen is the largest producing silver mine in the territory," he began, clearly proud. "I employ over 100 men in the mine, and another 20 in the processing facilities. My home, which you glimpsed on the hill, has 8 rooms including a proper parlor and dining room suitable for entertaining the territory's officials." As he continued detailing his assets and position in the community, Sophia found her thoughts drifting back to the North Star Ranch, to the simple breakfast on the porch, the comfortable furnishings that spoke of home rather than status, the way Rowan Nash had looked at her as if truly seeing her. "Miss Harrington," Blackwood's sharp tone recalled her attention. "I asked if you had any questions about your duties as my wife." Yes, of course." Sophia gathered her wandering thoughts. "Your letters mentioned you entertain frequently. I would be expected to host these gatherings." "Precisely." He nodded approvingly. "The governor visits twice yearly, and various investors and mining officials come through regularly. A proper hostess is essential to maintaining the relationships that keep the Silver Queen profitable. And children." The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. "That is, do you wish for a family?" Something flickered across his face, discomfort, annoyance. "A son would be useful eventually, to inherit the business. But I'm a busy man, Miss Harrington. My primary concern is finding a wife who understands her place and performs her duties without unnecessary sentimentality." The coldness of this statement struck Sophia like a physical blow, though she maintained her composure. "I see. I hope you do." Blackwood's gaze was assessing. "Your letters indicated you were practical and well-educated, not given to romantic notions. That's what I require in a wife." Their luncheon arrived, saving Sophia from having to respond immediately. As they ate, Blackwood consuming his meal with mechanical efficiency, while continuing to outline his expectations, she found herself wondering how she had failed to perceive his true nature through their correspondence. Had she been so desperate to escape her circumstances in Boston that she'd willfully misread between the lines? After the meal, Blackwood escorted her to the hotel's front desk, where he had already arranged a room for her. "I have business to attend to this afternoon," he said, checking his pocket watch. "I'll send my housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, with a suitable dress for the wedding tomorrow, 9 o'clock at the courthouse. Judge Wilson will perform the ceremony with my associates as witnesses." "So soon?" Sophia couldn't help asking. "Wouldn't it be better to take some time to become better acquainted?" Blackwood's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I've been without a wife for 5 years, Miss Harrington. My home requires a mistress, and you've traveled all this way for that purpose. Unless you've changed your mind." There was a challenge in his tone, a reminder of her vulnerable position. "No," Sophia said quietly. 9 o'clock tomorrow will be fine." "Good." He nodded briskly. "Rest this afternoon. I wouldn't want a repeat of yesterday's episode." With that, he departed, leaving Sophia to be shown to her room by a young hotel employee. The chamber was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the main street. Her trunk had already been delivered, standing at the foot of the bed. Alone at last, Sophia sank onto the edge of the mattress, removing her hat with trembling hands. What had she done? coming all this way to marry a man who viewed her as nothing more than an accessory to his business and social ambitions. A man who spoke of children as useful and dismissed affection as sentimentality. Yet what choice did she have? Her parents were dead, her inheritance spent on her father's debts. Her position as companion to her aunt had ended with the old woman's death, leaving Sophia with barely enough money for the journey west. To return east would mean seeking employment as a governess or companion positions that offered little security and less independence. No, she had made her decision. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Edward Blackwood, mistress of the grand house on the hill, wife to the most powerful man in St. Joe. It was a practical arrangement, just as she had told Rowan Nash. Rowan. The thought of him brought an unexpected ache to her chest. In just one day, he had shown her more genuine concern than Edward Blackwood had managed in their entire luncheon. But such thoughts were dangerous and pointless. Rowan Nash was nothing to her, and after tomorrow, she would likely never see him again. With a sigh, Sophia rose and began unpacking her trunk, laying out what few belongings she had brought with her to start her new life. As she did, a flash of color caught her eye, a small bunch of wildflowers, similar to those she had seen on the dining table at the ranch, now tucked carefully among her folded clothes. A simple gesture of kindness that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. That evening, as promised, Mrs. Finch arrived with a dress for the wedding, a severe gray silk that Sophia suspected had belonged to the first Mrs. Blackwood, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. The housekeeper was a thin, nervous woman who spoke little as she helped Sophia try on the garment, making a few additional adjustments with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Blackwood likes things just so," was all she said when Sophia thanked her, and something in the woman's averted gaze gave Sophia pause. "Mrs. Finch," she ventured, "you've worked for Mr. Blackwood for some time." 10 years come October," the housekeeper replied, pinning a seam. "And his first wife, what was she like?" Mrs. Finch's hand stilled momentarily. "Mrs. Blackwood was a fine lady," she said carefully, "from back east like yourself." "How did she die?" "Mr. Blackwood mentioned he's been widowed 5 years, but not the circumstances." "Fever," Mrs. Finch said shortly, resuming her work. "Took her quick. Now, if you'll turn to the right, miss, I need to check the hem." Sophia complied, sensing that further questions would be unwelcome. When Mrs. Finch departed with the adjusted dress, promising to return it early the next morning, Sophia was left alone with her growing unease. She spent a restless night, tossing on the unfamiliar bed as doubts plagued her. By morning, dark circles shadowed her eyes, visible even after she'd splashed cold water on her face and attempted to pinch color into her cheeks. Mrs. Finch returned at 7 with the altered dress and helped Sophia prepare for the wedding. As she fastened the long row of buttons up the back, the housekeeper's weathered fingers worked with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Finch," Sophia said impulsively, "were you happy in your marriage?" The question clearly surprised the older woman, whose hands paused momentarily. "Happy enough," she answered after a moment. "My Henry was a good man, not wealthy like Mr. Blackwood, but he treated me fair." She resumed buttoning. "Marriage ain't about happiness, Miss Harrington, it's about security. But surely one can have both, Mrs. Finch's reflection in the mirror met Sophia's gaze, something like pity in her tired eyes. "Some are luckier than others." She finished the last button. "There, you look proper. Proper. Not beautiful, not radiant, not like a bride should look on her wedding day, just proper." Sophia stared at her reflection, the severe gray dress with its high collar and tight sleeves, her hair pulled back in a simple chignon, her face pale and strained. This was to be her wedding day. At 8:30, a carriage arrived to take her to the courthouse, a small brick building in the center of town that housed the local government offices and courtroom. Mrs. Finch accompanied her, silent during the short journey. The courtroom was empty save for Edward Blackwood, already waiting with Judge Wilson and two men Sophia assumed were the promised witnesses' business associates, not friends. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration, just the cold efficiency of a business transaction. "Ah, Miss Harrington. Punctual. Good." Blackwood nodded approvingly, extending his arm to lead her to the judge's bench. As they took their positions before Judge Wilson, an older man with bushy side whiskers and spectacles, Sophia felt a curious detachment, as though she were watching herself from a distance. The judge opened his book, cleared his throat, and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in the bonds of holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over her as Sophia stared at the scarred wooden floor beneath her feet. Was this truly to be her life? Married to a man who valued her only for her social graces and potential to bear him a son, living in a grand house that would never feel like home. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional phrase hung in the silent courtroom for a moment, and Sophia found herself holding her breath, half expecting, hoping for someone to object, but there was only silence, until the courthouse doors burst open with a bang. Every head turned to see Rowan Nash standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands, chest heaving as though he'd run all the way there. "I have cause," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Nash," Blackwood hissed, his face flushing with anger. "This is a private ceremony. You have no business here." "I have every business stopping a woman from making the worst mistake of her life," Rowan replied, stepping forward. His eyes found Sophia's, intense and determined. "Miss Harrington, there are things you need to know before you say your vows." "This is preposterous," Blackwood snapped, turning to the judge. "Wilson, have this man removed at once." "I'll go," Rowan said, "but not before Miss Harrington hears the truth about the man she's about to marry." He addressed Sophia directly. "Edward Blackwood's first wife didn't die of fever, Miss Harrington. She fell from the balcony of Blackwood House. The official report called it an accident, but everyone in town knows she was unhappy, threatened to leave him." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face as she turned to Blackwood. "Is this true?" "It's slander," Blackwood snarled, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something dark that made Sophia step back from him. "Nash has always been jealous of my success. He'll say anything to undermine me." "Ask around town," Rowan urged. "Ask Mrs. Finch. Ask Dr. Simmons, who treated Catherine Blackwood's bruises multiple times before her accident." Sophia turned to Mrs. Finch, who stood near the back of the courtroom, her face ashen. "Mrs. Finch." The housekeeper's eyes darted between Blackwood and Sophia, fear evident in her posture. But something in Sophia's pleading gaze seemed to strengthen her resolve. "It's true," she said quietly. "Mrs. Catherine had bruises, often, said she was clumsy, but—" "Enough!" Blackwood's voice cracked like a whip as he lunged toward Mrs. Finch, who shrank back against the wall. "I won't stand here and be slandered by my own servants and a jealous rancher." His violent reaction confirmed everything for Sophia. She backed away from him, her heart pounding. "I cannot marry you, Mr. Blackwood. I'm sorry, but I cannot." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he spat, turning his fury on Rowan. "And you, Nash, I'll ruin you for this. I'll see that North Star Ranch is nothing but dust and ashes by the time I'm through." "I don't think so," came a new voice from the doorway. Sheriff Thomas Davis entered, his badge glinting on his chest, hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Threatening folks in front of a judge and witnesses isn't wise, Edward." "This doesn't concern you, Davis," Blackwood snapped. "When you start making threats in my town, it concerns me," the sheriff replied evenly. "Now I think this wedding's over. Miss Harrington has made her choice clear." He looked to Sophia. "Madam, do you need an escort somewhere?" Before Sophia could respond, Rowan stepped forward. "I'll see Miss Harrington safely wherever she wishes to go." The sheriff nodded, keeping his eyes on Blackwood. "That'll do. Edward, I suggest you return to your office and cool down. I don't want to hear about any retaliation against Nash or Miss Harrington." "Understood." Blackwood's face was a mask of cold fury as he glared at Sophia. "You'll regret this," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "No one in this town will help you now." With that, he stormed from the courthouse, brushing roughly past the sheriff. "Mrs." Finch hesitated, then hurried after him, pausing only to whisper, "I'm sorry, miss," to Sophia as she passed. In the stunned silence that followed, Sophia became acutely aware of her situation alone in a strange town, with no home, no prospects, and no protection save the tall rancher who now approached her cautiously, as one might a frightened animal. "Miss Harrington," Rowan said softly, "are you all right?" Sophia realized she was trembling, her hands clutched tightly together. I don't know." She looked up at him, finding steadiness in those blue eyes. "Why did you come? How did you know, Mrs.?" "Peterson overheard some talk at the general store yesterday," he explained. "About Blackwood seeking another wife. Third one, actually. His second marriage lasted less than a year. The wife fled back east after 3 months. When Martha told me, I knew I couldn't let another woman walk blindly into his house." He hesitated. "I should have told you yesterday, but it wasn't my place to interfere with your decision. And yet you did interfere. Today." There was no accusation in her voice, only wonder. A faint smile touched his lips. "Couldn't seem to help myself." The judge cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Well, since there's to be no wedding, I'll be returning to my chambers." He gathered his book and nodded to Sophia. "Good day, miss. I believe you've had a fortunate escape." As the judge departed, Sheriff Davis approached. "Miss Harrington, I should warn you Blackwood's a powerful man in these parts. He won't take this humiliation lightly." "What will he do?" Sophia asked, sudden fear gripping her. The sheriff shrugged. "Hard to say, but I wouldn't recommend staying at the hotel tonight. He owns a controlling interest in it." "She can return to North Star," Rowan said immediately. "At least until she decides what she wants to do next." Sophia looked at him, searching his face for any ulterior motive, but found only genuine concern. "Are you certain? I wouldn't want to impose further." "It's no imposition," he assured her, echoing his words from the day before. "Martha would be happy to have another woman around the place." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "That seems the wisest course for now, miss. I'll keep an eye on Blackwood, make sure he doesn't try anything foolish, but you'd be safer outside town limits for the time being." Decision made, Sophia gathered her meager dignity, still dressed in the wedding gown that wasn't to be used. "I need to collect my things from the hotel." "I'll accompany you," Rowan said, offering his arm. As they left the courthouse, Sophia was acutely aware of curious gazes following them down the street. News traveled fast in small towns, and by now, everyone in St. Joe likely knew that she had jilted Edward Blackwood at the altar. What they couldn't know was the tumult of emotions within her, relief warring with fear, uncertainty with a strange, buoyant feeling that might have been hope. At the hotel, the clerk's previously deferential manner had cooled considerably. He watched with barely concealed hostility as Sophia and Rowan ascended the stairs to her room. Inside, She quickly changed out of the gray wedding dress, stuffing it unceremoniously into her trunk before donning the simple blue dress she'd worn the day before. "I'm ready," she said, emerging from behind the dressing screen to find Rowan waiting by the window, his back tactfully turned. "Though I'm not certain what I'm ready for." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face, lighting his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "One day at a time, Miss Harrington. That's all any of us can do." As he lifted her trunk with easy strength, Sophia found herself studying him, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his simple shirt, the confident way he moved, the gentleness that seemed to underlie his strength. In the space of 2 days, Rowan Nash had become more real to her than Edward Blackwood had in months of correspondence. The hotel clerk sneered as they passed through the lobby. "Mr. Blackwood said to inform you that your bill remains unpaid, miss." Before Sophia could respond, Rowan set down the trunk and reached into his pocket, withdrawing several bills. "That should cover it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And a bit extra for your trouble." Outside, his wagon waited, and he loaded her trunk with efficient movements before helping her onto the seat. As they drove away from St. Joe, Sophia could feel the weight lifting from her shoulders with each turn of the wheels. "Thank you," she said finally, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "Not just for today, but for yesterday as well. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there when I stepped off that stage coach." Rowan glanced at her, his expression serious. "You'd have managed, Miss Harrington. You strike me as a woman of considerable strength." The simple assessment, so different from Blackwood's cold evaluation of her social usefulness, warmed something inside her. "Sophia," she said impulsively. "Please call me Sophia." His smile returned, slower this time but no less genuine. "Sophia," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "A beautiful name." They fell silent again as the wagon rolled toward North Star Ranch. But it was a comfortable silence, filled with the sounds of the land around them, the creak of wagon wheels, the steady clop of the horses' hooves, the rustle of wind through grass, and the distant call of birds. For the first time since leaving Boston, Sophia felt she could breathe freely. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was high overhead, casting short shadows as they pulled up before the house. Martha Peterson emerged onto the porch, worry etched on her kind face. "Oh, thank heavens!" she exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "When Rowan left in such a rush this morning, I feared—" She stopped, taking in the sight of Sophia still in her traveling dress rather than wedding finery. "You didn't go through with it?" "No," Sophia confirmed, accepting Rowan's hand to help her down from the wagon. "Thanks to Mr. Nash, Rowan, I learned some things about Mr. Blackwood that made marriage to him impossible." Martha's expression darkened. "That man," she muttered, then brightened as she took Sophia's arm. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. Come inside. You must be famished after such a morning." As Martha led her toward the house, Sophia glanced back to see Rowan unloading her trunk, his movements sure and steady. He caught her looking and offered a small smile that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Inside, Martha bustled about the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of cold chicken, bread, and fresh vegetables from her garden. As they ate at the kitchen table, a far cry from the formal dining room at the hotel, Sophia found herself relaxing further, the events of the morning beginning to feel like a bad dream from which she'd narrowly escaped. "What will you do now, dear?" Martha asked as she poured fresh lemonade. "Do you have family back east who could help you?" Sophia shook her head. "No family. My parents died years ago, and my aunt, my last remaining relative, passed away 3 months ago. That's why I answered Mr. Blackwood's advertisement. I had nowhere else to go." Martha clucked sympathetically. Well, you're welcome here for as long as you need. Isn't that right, Rowan? Rowan, who had been quietly eating his meal, looked up with those steady blue eyes. Of course. North Star is your safe harbor for as long as you wish it to be. I can't impose indefinitely, Sophia protested. I need to find employment, support myself somehow. St. Joe has a small school, Martha suggested. With your Boston education, you might be qualified to teach. Perhaps, Sophia agreed, though the thought of returning to town, where Edward Blackwood's influence was so pervasive, filled her with trepidation. There's no rush to decide, Rowan said, seeming to sense her discomfort. Take some time to recover from your journey. Consider your options carefully. Later that afternoon, as Sophia unpacked her few belongings in the same guest room she'd occupied before, she found herself contemplating her strange circumstances. 2 days ago, she had arrived in St. Joe expecting to marry a man she had never met. Now she was sheltering at the home of another stranger, one who had shown her more kindness in 48 hours than Edward Blackwood had in months of correspondence. A soft knock at the open door drew her attention. Rowan stood there, hat in hand, a hint of uncertainty in his posture despite his imposing height. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said. Not at all. Sophia set aside the dress she'd been hanging. Is something wrong? No, I just... He hesitated, then stepped into the room, still keeping a respectful distance. I wanted to make sure you're truly all right. This morning must have been difficult. The concern in his voice touched her deeply. It was, she admitted, but not in the way you might think. I'm not heartbroken over losing Edward Blackwood. I never loved him. I'm more disappointed in myself for not seeing his true nature sooner, for being so desperate to escape my situation that I was willing to bind myself to a man I knew nothing about. Rowan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Desperate circumstances can lead us to desperate decisions, but you showed real courage today, walking away when you learned the truth. Thanks to you, Sophia pointed out. If you hadn't come forward, you'd have found out eventually, he said grimly. But at what cost? A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with things unsaid. Finally, Rowan spoke again. I thought you might like to see something of the ranch tomorrow if you're interested. It's a beautiful property, especially in the morning light. The invitation brought a genuine smile to Sophia's lips. I'd like that very much. Good, he nodded, seeming pleased. I'll have Martha pack us a breakfast. We can ride out at dawn before the worst of the heat. He paused at the doorway. Sleep well, Sophia. You too, Rowan. After he'd gone, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, a curious lightness in her chest despite the tumultuous day. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something like hope for her future, undefined and uncertain as it might be. The next morning dawned clear and already warm, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold as Sophia made her way to the front porch. She'd dressed in her simplest skirt and shirtwaist, with sturdy boots she'd purchased for the journey west. Her hair was braided and pinned up securely, a concession to practicality rather than fashion. Rowan was waiting with 2 horses, his own sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, dappled mare. This is Daisy, he said, patting the mare's neck. She's gentle but sure-footed. Good for a rider who might be out of practice. It's been years since I rode, Sophia admitted, approaching the horse carefully. Not since I was a girl at my grandfather's country home. Daisy will take good care of you, Rowan assured her, helping her mount with a steadying hand at her waist. The brief contact sent a flutter of awareness through her that Sophia did her best to ignore. Once they were both mounted, Rowan led the way from the ranch yard, following a well-worn trail that wound through fields of grass still glittering with morning dew. They rode in companionable silence as the sun rose higher, painting the landscape in golden light. "It's beautiful," Sophia said at last, taking in the rolling grasslands that stretched to distant mountains. "So different from anything I knew in the East." Rowan nodded, his gaze sweeping the horizon with evident pride. "First time I saw this land, I knew I'd found home. Spent 5 years working other men's ranches to save enough for a down payment on my first 50 acres. "You've built something remarkable," Sophia observed. "Martha told me a little about how you started with almost nothing." A smile touched his lips. "Martha's prone to making me sound more impressive than I am, but I've been fortunate. Good land, good water, good men working alongside me." He guided his horse up a gentle rise. "There's a spot just ahead where we can stop for breakfast. Best view on the ranch." The spot proved to be a grassy knoll crowned by a single cottonwood tree, its broad canopy providing welcome shade. Below, the land fell away in a gentle slope, revealing the full expanse of North Star Ranch, the main house and outbuildings, the corrals where cattle milled about, the lush pastures watered by a creek that wound like a silver ribbon through the property. Rowan spread a blanket in the shade, then unpacked the breakfast Martha had prepared: thick slices of ham, fresh bread, hard-boiled eggs, and a jar of preserved peaches. They ate with the healthy appetite that comes from early rising and fresh air, talking easily about the ranch, the territory, and the broader world beyond. "How did you come to be in the Arizona Territory?" Sophia asked as they finished their meal. "Martha mentioned you came from Missouri." Rowan nodded, leaning back against the trunk of the cottonwood. "Born and raised near Kansas City. My father was a blacksmith, good at his trade but never one to put down roots. After the war, he fought for the Union. He grew restless. We moved west to Colorado when I was 15, then to New Mexico Territory." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost both my parents to influenza the winter I turned 18. After that, I drifted, working ranches wherever I could find employment, saved every penny." "Until you found this place," Sophia finished for him. "Until I found this place," he agreed, his expression softening as he surveyed his domain. "Never imagined I'd have all this. Never imagined I'd be here at 30 with land of my own, good stock, a future to build." He looked at her directly then. "What about you? What brought Sophia Harrington from Boston society to the wild Arizona Territory?" Sophia smiled wryly. "I was hardly Boston society. My father was a professor of literature at a small college. We lived comfortably enough, but when he died, we discovered he'd left significant debts. My mother and I sold our home, moved to a small apartment." She traced a pattern on the blanket, remembering. "Mother took in sewing to supplement the small annuity father left. I found work as a teacher at a girls' school." "You're a teacher." Rowan's interest was evident. Sophia corrected. "Mother died 3 years ago. Her heart simply gave out. I couldn't afford to keep our apartment on my teacher's salary, so I became companion to my aunt, my father's sister." It was not an ideal situation. She chose her words carefully, not wanting to speak ill of the dead. Aunt Margaret was demanding, particular. "When she died this spring, she left me enough money for my journey west, but little else. I saw Mr. Blackwood's advertisement in the newspaper and thought, well, I thought it was a chance for security if nothing else." "And now?" Rowan asked gently. Sophia looked out over the ranch, considering. "Now I find myself in a strange land with no prospects, no home, and no plan." She smiled suddenly, surprising herself with the genuine lightness she felt. "And oddly enough, I'm not as frightened as I should be." Rowan's answering smile was warm. "You'll find your place here, Sophia. The West has a way of making room for people willing to work hard and face its challenges." They lingered under the cottonwood, talking of books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. Sophia found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn out by Rowan's quiet humor and thoughtful observations. By the time they mounted their horses to return to the ranch, the morning was well advanced, the heat building despite the early hour. "We should get back," Rowan said, glancing at the sun. "Martha will wonder what's become of us." As they rode side by side, Sophia found herself stealing glances at her companion, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the capable hands that held the reins with such easy confidence. There was something about Rowan Nash that made her feel safe, yet strangely breathless at the same time. They were nearing the ranch when the sound of approaching riders caught their attention. Rowan tensed, one hand moving instinctively to the rifle scabbard attached to his saddle. "Stay close," he said quietly, positioning his horse slightly ahead of hers as three mounted men came into view. Sophia recognized Edward Blackwood immediately, flanked by two rough-looking men she hadn't seen before. All three carried rifles, the barrels glinting in the sunlight. "Well, well," Blackwood called as they approached, his voice carrying across the distance. "If it isn't the gallant rancher and his damsel in distress, how touching." "Blackwood," Rowan acknowledged, his voice level but with an undercurrent of tension. "You're trespassing on North Star land." "Am I?" Blackwood's smile was cold. "I was under the impression this section belonged to the territory, public grazing land." "You know damn well this is my property," Rowan replied. "State your business and then ride on." Blackwood ignored him, focusing his attention on Sophia. "Miss Harrington, you're looking well for a woman who nearly swooned from the heat 2 days ago. I see Nash is keeping you entertained." Sophia straightened in her saddle, refusing to be intimidated despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe our business was concluded yesterday." "I wish you well, but I have no desire for further acquaintance." "So prim, so proper," Blackwood mocked. "Yet here you are, unchaperoned with a man to whom you're not married. What would your Boston friends say?" "That's enough," Rowan cut in, his voice hard. "Say what you came to say, Blackwood, or leave." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Very well. I came to deliver a message, a business proposition, if you will." He shifted in his saddle, addressing Sophia directly. "The stage coach to Tucson leaves tomorrow morning. Be on it, Miss Harrington, and I'll consider the matter between us closed. Stay, and I cannot be responsible for what might happen to those who harbor you." "Are you threatening Miss Harrington?" Rowan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Merely pointing out consequences," Blackwood replied smoothly. "St. Joe is my town. The mines are my business. I control the water rights to half the grazing land in the county." His gaze shifted to Rowan. "Including the creek that feeds North Star Ranch. It would be a shame if that water were suddenly unavailable." Sophia felt her blood run cold. "You can't do that." "Can I?" Blackwood's smile returned, smug and assured. "Ask your protector about territorial water laws. Ask him what happens to a cattle ranch without access to the creek that waters it." He straightened, gathering his reins. "Tomorrow's stagecoach, Miss Harrington. I suggest you be on it." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit. They rode away at a canter, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Sophia turned to Rowan, who was watching the retreating riders with a grim expression. "Can he do that? Cut off your water?" Rowan's jaw was tight. "He has enough influence with the territorial authorities to make it difficult, yes. The water rights in this area are still being sorted out legally. Blackwood has the money to tie things up in court for years." "Then I have to leave," Sophia said immediately. "I can't let him destroy your ranch because of me." "No." Rowan's voice was firm as he turned to face her. Running won't solve this. Blackwood's a bully. Give in to him once and he'll never stop. But your ranch will survive, he finished for her. I didn't build North Star by backing down from threats. His expression softened. Besides, where would you go? Back east with no money, no prospects, or to another frontier town where you know no one? Sophia had no answer. The reality of her situation was stark. She had nowhere to go, no means to support herself, no one to turn to except the man beside her. Let's get back to the house, Rowan said more gently. We need to talk this through, make a plan. By the time they reached the ranch, word of Blackwood's threat had preceded them. One of Rowan's ranch hands had seen the confrontation from a distance and ridden ahead to warn Martha, who was waiting anxiously on the porch. That awful man, she exclaimed as they dismounted. Coming onto our land, making threats. I've a mind to get my shotgun next time he shows his face. Despite the gravity of the situation, Sophia couldn't help smiling at the image of motherly Martha confronting Edward Blackwood with a shotgun. The smile faded quickly, however, as they gathered around the kitchen table to discuss their options. Blackwood's not bluffing about the water rights, Rowan explained, spreading a rough map of the area on the table. The North Fork Creek runs through his mining claim before it reaches North Star. He's never interfered with it before because he had no reason to. The miners need the water downstream anyway, but if he diverts it at the source, the ranch would be crippled, Martha finished, her expression grim. And not just us. The Wilkinsons' place to the south depends on that water too. Could you dig wells? Sophia suggested, studying the map. Rowan shook his head. The water table's too deep in most places. We have 2 wells now, but they wouldn't support the cattle herd, especially not in summer. Then I should leave, Sophia said again, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. I won't be the cause of so much destruction. And go where? Martha demanded. Back to a man who's already shown his true colors, or off to some other territory where you'd be just as alone? Sophia had no answer. The hopelessness of her situation pressed down on her, stealing her earlier optimism. No matter what choice she made, someone would suffer, either herself or the people who had shown her nothing but kindness. There's another option, Rowan said finally, his voice quiet but determined. One that would solve the immediate problem. Both women looked at him expectantly. Marriage, he said simply, his eyes meeting Sophia's directly. If you were my wife, Blackwood would have no further claim on you. His threat would be empty. Sophia stared at him, certain she had misheard. Marriage, too, to you. It would be a practical arrangement, Rowan continued, his tone measured. You need protection and security. I can provide that. And the ranch could use a woman's touch. Martha's been telling me so for years. He glanced at the housekeeper, who was watching with wide eyes. It wouldn't have to be. That is, we could have separate rooms until we know each other better, or permanently if that's your preference. Sophia's mind reeled. Was he truly proposing, after knowing her just 2 days? Rowan, I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, he replied, his expression earnest. I'm not declaring undying love, Sophia. I'm offering a partnership, a chance for both of us to build something worthwhile. He hesitated, a hint of vulnerability showing through his usual confidence. I've respected you from the moment you stood up to Blackwood in that courthouse. I believe we could have a good life together, given time. The sincerity in his voice struck Sophia deeply. This was no passionate declaration, no romantic gesture from a storybook. It was something more rare and valuable, an honest offer from a good man. I need time to think, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course. Rowan nodded, rising from the table. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. With that, he excused himself to attend to ranch business, leaving Sophia alone with Martha. The older woman regarded her thoughtfully. "He's a good man, Sophia, the best I know." "I believe that," Sophia replied, "but it's a lifetime commitment to someone I barely know." Martha's eyes were kind but direct. "You were ready to make that commitment to Edward Blackwood 2 days ago." "That was different," Sophia protested. "I'd corresponded with him for months." "And learned more about Rowan Nash in 2 days than you learned about Blackwood in all those letters," Martha pointed out gently. "I'm not saying you should rush into anything. Just consider what kind of man he is, what kind of life you might build together." Sophia did consider, throughout the afternoon and into the evening. She walked the grounds of North Star, watching the ranch hands at work, observing how they interacted with Rowan with respect but without fear, laughing at shared jokes, deferring to his expertise without resentment. She noted how he spoke to each man by name, inquired after families, offered suggestions rather than barking orders. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Sophia found herself on the front porch, watching as Rowan returned from the far pasture. He dismounted with easy grace, taking a moment to speak with the young ranch hand who came to take his horse. There was nothing showy about him, nothing calculated to impress. Just a man doing what he loved, building something of value with his own hands. When he approached the house and saw her waiting, his step faltered slightly, but he continued up the path, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "Evening," he said simply, stopping at a respectful distance. "Evening," Sophia returned, suddenly nervous though she'd rehearsed what she wanted to say. "I've been thinking about your proposition." Rowan waited, his expression carefully neutral, though she thought she detected a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "It's a generous offer," Sophia continued. "More generous than I deserve, considering I've brought nothing but trouble since arriving on your doorstep." "That's not true," he interjected. "You've brought—" He seemed to search for the right words. "Life to this place. In just 2 days, you've made the house feel more like a home than it has in years." The simple admission touched her deeply. "Even so, I can't accept your offer as it stands." Something like disappointment crossed his features, quickly masked. "I understand." "It was presumptuous of me." "No," Sophia interrupted, taking a step toward him. "That's not what I meant. I can't accept a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement like the one I nearly entered with Edward Blackwood." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "If I were to marry you, Rowan Nash, it would be because we both believed something real could grow between us. Not just respect or friendship, but more." Rowan's eyes widened slightly, a cautious hope entering his gaze. "And do you believe that's possible?" "I think," Sophia said slowly, "that I've felt more for you in 2 days than I ever felt for Edward Blackwood in months of correspondence. I think you're a man of honor and kindness, someone I could grow to care for deeply." She met his gaze directly. "But I need time. Not to decide if I'll leave. I've already decided I won't give in to Blackwood's threats, but time to know you better, to be sure." A slow smile spread across Rowan's face, transforming his features. "Time," he repeated. "That seems reasonable." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "And while we're taking this time to know each other better, would it be presumptuous of me to court you properly, the way a woman like you deserves?" Sophia felt a warmth bloom in her chest, spreading outward until she was certain her cheeks were flushed. "I'd like that very much." Rowan's smile deepened. "Then that's settled." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. "Tomorrow we'll deal with Blackwood together. For tonight." His thumb traced a gentle pattern on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "For tonight, may I sit with you a while, watch the stars come out?" In answer, Sophia tugged him toward the porch swing that hung at the far end of the veranda. As they settled side by side, a comfortable distance between them but their hands still joined, she felt a sense of rightness that had been absent in all her planning and correspondence with Edward Blackwood. Here, under the vast Arizona sky as the first stars began to appear, Sophia Harrington found herself imagining a future she hadn't dared to dream of, not a marriage of convenience or a business arrangement, but a partnership built on genuine affection, mutual respect, and the possibility of love. The following morning brought a council of war around the breakfast table. Rowan had sent for Sheriff Davis and Judge Wilson, who arrived just as Martha was serving coffee. Both men listened gravely as Sophia and Rowan recounted Blackwood's threats. "Can't say I'm surprised," the sheriff said, accepting a cup from Martha. "Blackwood's not used to being crossed and being publicly humiliated at what was supposed to be his wedding." He shook his head. "That's the kind of thing a man like him doesn't forget." "What about his threat to divert the creek?" Rowan asked, addressing the judge. "Where do we stand legally?" Judge Wilson stroked his side whiskers thoughtfully. "Water rights in the territory are complicated. Technically, Blackwood's mining operation has prior claim to the North Fork, since his grandfather established the first claim back in '53. But there's also the matter of beneficial use. He can't simply divert water out of spite if it's not being put to productive use." "Which means a court battle," Rowan concluded grimly. "One that could take years to resolve. And one that Blackwood, with his resources, would likely win in the end," the judge admitted. "Unless—" "Unless what?" Sophia prompted when he trailed off. "Unless there were another legal claim that superseded his." Judge Wilson's eyes twinkled suddenly. "Such as a prior water right that had been overlooked," Rowan frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "The old Spanish land grant," Sheriff Davis said suddenly, understanding dawning on his weathered face. "Are you thinking of the Mendoza grant?" Judge Wilson nodded. "Precisely. The Mendoza family received a land grant from the Spanish Crown in 1795 that included what's now North Star Ranch and the headwaters of the North Fork Creek. When the territory became part of the United States, those Spanish grants were supposed to be honored. But Blackwood's grandfather's mining claim was filed without proper regard for the existing grant," the judge finished. "Most of those old Spanish claims were ignored during the early mining days, but they're still legally valid if they can be proven." He looked thoughtful. "I seem to recall that old Carlos Mendoza, the last of the family in these parts, sold his remaining interest in the land to someone before he returned to Mexico. Must have been, 15 years ago now. That would have been about when my father bought this parcel," Rowan said slowly. "He purchased it from a land company in Tucson. I inherited the deed when he passed." "Check your deed, son," Judge Wilson advised. "If it mentions the Mendoza grant, even in passing, you may have a stronger legal claim to that water than Blackwood does." Hope blossomed in Sophia's chest as she watched Rowan stride to a secretary desk in the corner of the living room. He unlocked a drawer and withdrew a leather folder, from which he extracted several yellowed papers. "Here it is," he said after a moment, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "The deed mentions all rights and privileges associated with the original Mendoza grant of 1795, including but not limited to water rights, mineral rights, and timber rights." He looked up, meeting Sophia's gaze with a growing smile. "It's been here all along. I just never had reason to challenge Blackwood before." "This changes everything," Sheriff Davis said, setting down his coffee cup with a decisive click. "Blackwood can threaten all he wants, but with a Spanish land grant backing your claim to that water, he's the one who'd be breaking the law by diverting it." We'll need to file the appropriate papers with the Territorial Land Office, Judge Wilson cautioned. And Blackwood won't take this lying down. He'll fight it every step of the way. Let him, Rowan said firmly, returning to the table with the deed still in hand. I've got right on my side, and more important things to fight for now. His eyes met Sophia's again, and the warmth in them sent color rising to her cheeks. The plan was quickly formed. Judge Wilson would take the original deed to the territorial capital to file the necessary papers asserting Rowan's water rights based on the Spanish grant. Sheriff Davis would inform Blackwood that any attempt to divert the creek would be met with legal action. And Rowan and Sophia would continue as they were, neither bowing to threats nor rushing into decisions. As the men prepared to leave, Sophia pulled Judge Wilson aside. "There's something else," she said quietly, "something about Edward Blackwood that concerns me deeply." The judge's bushy eyebrows rose. "Oh, his first wife's death. Rowan mentioned it wasn't an accident as reported. Is that true?" Judge Wilson's expression grew serious. "Nothing was ever proven, Miss Harrington, but there were suspicions. Catherine Blackwood was a spirited woman, not the type to meekly accept the kind of control Edward demanded. There were rumors of arguments of her threatening to leave him." He sighed heavily. "And then she fell from the balcony of Blackwood House. Edward claimed she'd been drinking, lost her balance, no witnesses to say otherwise. And his second wife, the one who fled back east, Eliza Blackwood," the judge supplied, "lovely young woman from Philadelphia. Married Edward by proxy, arrived by stagecoach much like yourself. Lasted 3 months before she disappeared one night. Left a note saying she feared for her life and was returning to her family." He shook his head. "Edward claimed she was mentally unstable, imagining threats. Given his standing in the community, most people accepted his explanation. But not you," Sophia guessed. "I've been a judge for 30 years, Miss Harrington. I've seen the worst and best of human nature. Edward Blackwood has always struck me as a man who views people as possessions, things to be controlled and used according to his will." His eyes were kind but serious. "You had a fortunate escape. I'm glad Mr. Nash was there to intervene." "So am I," Sophia said softly, her gaze drifting to where Rowan stood by the door, deep in conversation with the sheriff. "So am I." After the men had departed, the day settled into a strange mix of tension and normalcy. Rowan attended to ranch business, conferring with his foreman about moving some cattle to the upper pastures as a precaution in case Blackwood attempted anything before the legal protections were in place. Sophia helped Martha with household tasks, finding comfort in the simple rhythms of domestic life. By late afternoon, a sense of waiting had settled over North Star Ranch. The hands were alert, watching the road for any sign of trouble. Rowan had stationed 2 men at the point where the creek entered his property, with instructions to ride for the sheriff at the first sign of interference. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Sophia found Rowan on the front porch, staring out at the road with a vigilant expression. She joined him at the railing, her presence seeming to ease some of the tension from his shoulders. "You think he'll try something?" she asked quietly. "Blackwood's not used to being thwarted," Rowan replied, his gaze still on the horizon. "Judge Wilson's legal strategy is sound, but it will take time to formalize. Until then," he shrugged, "we stay alert." They stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, the evening breeze stirring Sophia's skirts and lifting a lock of hair from Rowan's forehead. Without thinking, she reached up to brush it back, her fingers lingering for a moment against his temple. Rowan turned to her, surprise and something warmer in his eyes. "Sophia," he said softly, reaching for her hand and holding it gently in his. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "Not for myself, but for you. For what Blackwood might do to this place you've built." "North Star has weathered drought, flood, and blizzard," Rowan said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as it had the night before. "It will weather Edward Blackwood, too." The confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Sophia couldn't quite shake her unease. "It's my fault he's targeting you." "If I hadn't come here, then I'd never have met you," Rowan interrupted gently. "And that would have been a far greater loss than anything Blackwood could inflict." His eyes held hers, serious and sincere. "I meant what I said yesterday, Sophia. Even in the short time you've been here, you've brought something to North Star to me that I didn't even know was missing." Sophia felt her breath catch at the quiet intensity in his voice. "And what is that?" "Hope," he said simply. "For something more than just building a successful ranch. For a true partnership, a shared life." The words touched something deep within her, a longing she'd scarcely acknowledged even to herself. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention back to the road. 4 riders approached at a gallop, dust rising from their horses' hooves. As they drew closer, Sophia recognized Sheriff Davis in the lead, followed by 3 men she didn't know. "Trouble," Rowan called as they reined in before the porch. The sheriff dismounted quickly, his expression grim. "Blackwood's men are at the creek, Nash, armed and digging what looks like a diversion channel despite my warning this morning." Rowan's jaw tightened. "My men," holding position for now but outnumbered. Blackwood brought a dozen miners with picks and shovels. The sheriff gestured to the men who had accompanied him. "These are deputies I swore in when word reached town, but we need to move fast if we're going to stop this before it gets out of hand." Rowan was already moving, calling for his foreman. "Pete, saddle my horse and get the men together. Armed." Sophia caught his arm as he turned to go inside, presumably for his rifle. "Rowan, please be careful. This isn't worth bloodshed." He paused, covering her hand with his own. "No blood will be shed if I can help it, but I won't let Blackwood destroy what I've built." His expression softened. "What we might build together." With that, he was gone, striding into the house with purpose in every line of his body. Sophia turned to the sheriff, who was conferring quietly with his deputies. "Sheriff Davis," she called, decision crystallizing within her. "I'm coming with you." The lawman looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Harrington, this is no place for a lady. There might be trouble." "I'm the cause of this trouble," Sophia replied firmly, "and I intend to help end it." She raised her chin, meeting his skeptical gaze directly. "Besides, Edward Blackwood is less likely to order his men to open fire if I'm present. He still considers me his rightful property in a way. He won't risk harming me." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded grudgingly. "You may be right about that. But you stay back with the horses once we reach the creek, understand? First sign of gunplay, you find cover." "Understood." By the time Rowan emerged from the house, rifle in hand, Sophia was already mounting one of the spare horses the deputies had brought. His eyes widened at the sight. "Absolutely not," he began, striding toward her. "Sophia, you can't." "I can and I will," she interrupted, settling herself in the saddle with more confidence than she felt. "This confrontation is happening because of me. I need to be there." "It's too dangerous," Rowan protested. "Blackwood is unpredictable, and his men won't hesitate to use force if ordered." "Which is precisely why I should be present," Sophia countered. "He won't risk harming me. It would turn the entire town against him. My presence might be what prevents this from becoming violent." She could see the struggle in his eyes, concern for her safety warring with recognition of the logic in her argument. Finally, he sighed. "Stay behind me at all times," he conceded. "And if I tell you to leave, you go. No arguments." "Agreed," Sophia said, relief flooding through her. She had expected a longer battle. With the addition of Rowan's ranch hands, their party numbered 12 as they rode out, following the course of North Fork Creek toward the point where it entered Blackwood's mining claim. The sun was low on the horizon now, casting long shadows across the land and turning the water to liquid gold where it flowed through the grassland. They heard the commotion before they saw it, the shouts of men, the clang of metal on stone, the splash of diverted water. Rounding a bend in the creek, they came upon the scene. A dozen or more miners wielding picks and shovels, digging a wide channel to redirect the creek's flow away from North Star Ranch. Blackwood himself stood on a rise above the work, directing operations like a general commanding troops. Opposite them, 2 of Rowan's ranch hands sat their horses, rifles ready but not aimed, clearly outnumbered and uncertain how to proceed. Sheriff Davis raised his hand, halting their party while they were still partially concealed by a stand of cottonwoods. "Nash, you and I will approach first. Deputies and your men stay back but ready. Miss Harrington, you remain here until we call for you." Sophia wanted to protest but remembered her promise to Rowan. She nodded her agreement, watching as the 2 men rode forward into the open, the sheriff's badge glinting in the fading light. "Blackwood," Davis called, his voice carrying across the water. "This is Sheriff Davis. You're in violation of territorial water law. Order your men to stop work immediately." Blackwood turned, showing no surprise at their arrival. "Sheriff," he acknowledged with cold composure, "I'm merely exercising my legal right to the water that flows through my mining claim. The law is quite clear on the matter of prior appropriation." "The law is also clear on Spanish land grants," Rowan countered, his voice steady. "The water rights to North Fork Creek were established by the Mendoza Grant of 1795, which is referenced in my deed. Judge Wilson has taken the documentation to the territorial capital as we speak." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face, quickly masked. "A convenient claim, Nash. But until such documentation is officially registered, my rights take precedence." "That's not how the law works, and you know it," Sheriff Davis said firmly. "Disputed claims remain as they are until legal resolution. You can't simply take matters into your own hands." "Can I?" Blackwood's smile was thin. "Look around you, Sheriff. I have the manpower, the resources, and the will to secure what's mine. By the time any legal decision is reached, Nash's ranch will be dust and his cattle scattered or dead." His gaze shifted to Rowan. "Unless, of course, he sees reason and releases his claim on what is rightfully mine." "Miss Harrington is not property to be claimed," Rowan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She's made her choice clear. Accept it and move on, Blackwood." "A choice made under your influence," Blackwood snapped, his composure slipping. "A choice she would reconsider if circumstances were different." It was the opening Sophia had been waiting for. Before anyone could stop her, she urged her horse forward, emerging from the shelter of the trees to join Rowan and the sheriff. "You're wrong, Mr. Blackwood," she called, her voice stronger than she had expected. "My decision had nothing to do with Mr. Nash's influence and everything to do with learning your true character." Blackwood's eyes widened at the sight of her. "Miss Harrington, this is no place for a lady." "I disagree," Sophia replied, bringing her horse alongside Rowan's. "This conflict is about me, so I should be present for its resolution." "About you?" Blackwood's laugh was harsh. "This is about respect, about a man's right to what he's claimed. Nash stole what was rightfully mine first, my bride, and now he attempts to steal my water." "I was never yours to steal," Sophia said firmly. "Our arrangement was conditional on mutual agreement. When I learned the truth about your previous marriages, that condition was voided." Murmurs ran through the assembled miners at her words. Blackwood's face darkened. Lies and rumors spread by those jealous of my success. Not lies, came a new voice. Mrs. Finch, Blackwood's housekeeper, emerged from among the miners. She looked small and frightened but determined. I've served in Blackwood House for 10 years. I saw the bruises on Mrs. Catherine. I heard her screams the night she died. She turned to face the miners. Many of you knew Catherine Blackwood. You know she wasn't drinking that night, wasn't unsteady on her feet as Mr. Blackwood claimed. Silence, Blackwood roared, but it was too late. The miners were exchanging glances, several nodding in agreement with Mrs. Finch's words. And Eliza Blackwood, the housekeeper continued, her voice gaining strength. She didn't leave because she was unstable. She left because he struck her when she questioned his orders. I helped her escape, gave her money from my own savings to reach the stagecoach station. Sophia could see the tide turning in the faces of the miners. These were hard men, accustomed to danger and rough conditions. But there was a code in the West: women were to be protected, not abused. And a man who would raise his hand to his wife was no man at all in their eyes. Enough of this, Blackwood snarled, drawing a pistol from inside his coat. Get back to work, all of you, or find new employment. The miners hesitated, looking between their employer and the sheriff, whose hand now rested on his own weapon. Put the gun down, Edward, Sheriff Davis said, his voice calm but authoritative. There's no need for this to get ugly. It's already ugly, Blackwood replied, his pistol wavering between the sheriff and Rowan. Nash has turned my own town against me, my own workers. Well, I won't stand for it. His voice rose to a shout. North Star Ranch will be mine by the time I'm done. And you, Miss Harrington, will regret the day you chose a dirt-poor rancher over me. It happened so quickly that Sophia barely had time to react. Blackwood's gun steadied, aiming directly at Rowan. Without thinking, she urged her horse forward, placing herself between them just as Blackwood fired. The shot went wide, startled by her sudden movement, but the sound spooked her horse, which reared in alarm. Sophia, unprepared, lost her grip on the reins and felt herself sliding from the saddle. For a sickening moment, she was falling, the world tilting around her. Then strong arms caught her, breaking her fall as they both tumbled to the ground. Rowan had dismounted in a fluid motion, catching her before she could hit the hard earth. They landed in a heap, his body cushioning hers, his arms protectively around her. Sophia, he gasped, his voice tight with fear. Are you hurt? No, she managed, though her heart was racing so fast she could barely speak. I'm all right. Around them, chaos had erupted. Sheriff Davis and his deputies had their guns drawn, covering Blackwood, who stood frozen, his pistol still smoking. The miners had scattered at the sound of gunfire, many dropping their tools and backing away from the confrontation. Edward Blackwood, you're under arrest, the sheriff announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent creek bed. Attempted murder is a hanging offense in this territory. It was an accident, Blackwood protested, his face ashen. The gun discharged accidentally. I never meant save it for the judge. One of the deputies cut in, moving forward to take Blackwood's weapon. As the lawman secured Blackwood, Rowan helped Sophia to her feet, his hands gentle but trembling slightly as they checked her for injuries. That was the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Putting yourself in front of a loaded gun. I couldn't let him shoot you, Sophia replied simply, her own hands coming up to frame his face, reassuring herself that he was unharmed. Not when we've only just found each other. Something in her words seemed to break through Rowan's careful restraint. He pulled her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips found hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce, filled with the relief of danger past and the promise of something just beginning. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Sophia became aware of their audience. The sheriff was tactfully looking elsewhere as his deputies led a subdued Blackwood away, but the miners and ranch hands were watching with undisguised interest, a few even breaking into appreciative whistles. "Well, that settles that," Mrs. Finch observed dryly, coming to stand beside them. About time someone stood up to him proper. "Mrs. Finch," Sophia said, recovering her composure enough to address the housekeeper, "your testimony was very brave. You risked a great deal." The older woman shrugged. "Been carrying the weight of what I knew for too long. Couldn't stand by and watch him ruin another life." She eyed Sophia appraisingly. "You'll do better with this one." She nodded toward Rowan. "Seen how he treats his people. Mark of a good man, that is." As the crowd began to disperse, the miners returning to town, the sheriff and his deputies escorting Blackwood to jail, and Rowan's men moving to dismantle the partially dug diversion, Rowan kept his arm securely around Sophia's waist, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. "What now?" she asked softly, leaning into his strength. "Now," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple, "we go home, and tomorrow we begin building the life we want, together." The word "together" lingered in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. As they mounted their horses for the ride back to North Star Ranch, Sophia safely seated before Rowan on his horse, her mount being led behind, she felt a certainty settle over her, peaceful and right. This was where she belonged. Not in Boston, not in some grand house on a hill, but here in this wild, beautiful territory, with a man whose strength was matched by his gentleness, whose ambition was tempered by integrity. The sun set behind them as they rode, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, heralding the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Sophia Harrington became Sophia Nash in a ceremony that bore no resemblance to the cold, business-like affair Edward Blackwood had planned. The entire town of St. Joe turned out for the wedding, held under the cottonwood tree where they had shared their first breakfast. Judge Wilson officiated, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd as he spoke of partnerships built on mutual respect and affection. Martha Peterson wept openly, while Rowan's ranch hands stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, hats clutched in nervous hands. Sophia wore a gown of ivory silk that had arrived just days earlier from a dressmaker in Tucson, a gift from Rowan, who had insisted she should have something beautiful for their day. But more precious than the gown was the look in his eyes as she walked toward him on Sheriff Davis's arm, a look of wonder, of devotion, of a love that had grown steadily and surely in the months since they had faced down Edward Blackwood together. "I take you, Sophia Harrington, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Rowan vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." As Sophia repeated her own vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here from a desperate decision made in a Boston boarding house to this moment of perfect certainty. When Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, and Rowan's lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their union, she knew she had found not just security, but the love she had never dared to hope for. Edward Blackwood had been convicted of attempted murder and sent to the territorial prison in Yuma, his influence in St. Joe diminishing with each passing day. The Silver Queen mine continued to operate under the management of his former foreman, who proved to be a far more reasonable neighbor than his predecessor. North Star Ranch flourished under the joint stewardship of Rowan and Sophia Nash. With the water rights secured by the Spanish land grant, they expanded their herd and added several hundred acres to their holdings. The following spring, construction began on a new wing for the ranch house rooms that would someday, they hoped, be filled with the laughter of children. But on their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of the home, they now truly shared, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. Such future plans seemed distant and unimportant compared to the present moment. "Happy?" Rowan asked, his arms encircling her from behind, his chin resting lightly on her head. Sophia leaned back against the solid warmth of him, her hands coming up to cover his where they rested at her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "When I stepped off that stage coach and fainted at your feet, I never imagined that you'd end up married to the man who caught you." There was a smile in his voice. "That I'd find home," she corrected softly, turning in his arms to face him. "Not just a place to live, but a true home. With a man who sees me, really sees me." Rowan's eyes, so blue against his sun-browned skin, were tender as they gazed down at her. "I saw you from the first moment, Sophia Nash, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing this life, choosing me." As he lowered his head to kiss her, Sophia surrendered to the joy that filled her heart, grateful for the heat that had brought her to her knees that fateful day, for the cowboy who had caught her, and for the words that had started their journey together. "Rest. You're safe here. Safe and loved, and finally home."